She kept quiet for over 40 years, but just before her death, Elvis's longtime maid whispered a shocking truth no one saw coming. What she revealed flips everything we thought we knew about the king. It's not in the books, and it's not what fans want to hear. Subscribe for more. Long before Graceland became a tourist attraction, velvet ropes and all, it was just a house. A lived-in, slightly chaotic home filled with music, late-night visitors, and moments of quiet in between. And somewhere in that mix was a woman almost no one noticed, Nancy Rooks. Nancy wasn't a star. She didn't wear sparkly clothes or walk red carpets. In fact, most Elvis fans didn't even know her name. But for 10 important years, she was a steady presence inside the king's world. She worked as his maid, his cook, and more importantly, his trusted set of eyes and ears behind closed doors. She didn't arrive at Graceland because of connections. She came by accident, a simple temp job through an agency, covering for someone who was out sick. That's all it was supposed to be. But Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, noticed her. Something about the way she worked, her calm energy, her quiet respectfulness. He asked her to stay. From that moment, Nancy's life changed forever. She wasn't just someone who cleaned the floors. She became a fixture in the house. And slowly, Elvis came to rely on her. He didn't just eat the meals she made. He asked for them. Midnight cravings, comfort foods, southern dishes like cornbread and fried pickles. She didn't just do chores, she understood the rhythm of the home. What made her different was how she saw Elvis, not as a global icon, not as the king, but as a man. Someone who walked barefoot down the stairs, someone who mumbled requests for peach cobbler, someone who sometimes wanted to laugh and other times wanted to sit in silence. For years, she kept those moments to herself. No headlines, no TV interviews, just memories she carried like a secret. But toward the end of her life, that started to change. Being inside Graceland wasn't about glamour. It was about understanding an entirely different way of life. Elvis lived on his own time, and if you worked in that house, your life shifted around his clock. Nancy's shifts started late in the afternoon. While most people were having dinner, she was making breakfast because Elvis didn't follow a normal schedule. He'd wake late, sometimes in the evening. Meals came at midnight, not noon. The house came alive when the rest of the world was asleep. She remembered the way he came down the stairs, sometimes with a smile, sometimes quiet. He'd wear his robe or just slippers, his hair still tousled. He might sit down at the kitchen counter and ask for a fried sandwich, or he might just wander through without a word. But there was always something human in those moments. There were hymns sung late at night, not performances, just quiet songs shared between Elvis, his grandmother, and Nancy in the kitchen. There were card games, chats about random cravings, and short exchanges that meant more than anyone realized at the time. She saw who came through the door: celebrities, bodyguards, women, friends from the neighborhood. But she also saw what happened when they left. The house grew still. Elvis, often surrounded by people, would suddenly be alone. And in those moments, Nancy noticed he didn't always seem content. He never told her everything, but she didn't need him to. She could tell by the way he paused before speaking, by the time he'd ask her to sit while he talked about nothing and everything. Nancy wasn't just a maid, she became part of the house's heartbeat. Over the years, as stories about Elvis flew across tabloids and documentaries, Nancy remained quiet. She didn't sell rumors, she didn't appear on talk shows. She answered fans with grace but never revealed the details. He was kind, she'd say. He was generous, funny. And she left it at that, until the final chapters of her life when something in her shifted. And what she had to say was not what anyone expected. The summer of 1977 felt different. Even though music still echoed through the halls and visitors still came and went, something in the air had changed. Nancy could feel it. Elvis was still up late, still playing racquetball, still asking for his favorite foods, but there were subtle differences. He was moving slower. He didn't laugh as easily. Sometimes he'd eat like normal, other times he didn't want anything but juice. The sparkle in his eyes would fade in and out, like a flickering light bulb. He still had shows planned. He talked about getting back on the road. Most people forget that. He wasn't shutting himself away. There were suitcases packed, rehearsals scheduled. On paper, everything looked normal. But inside the house, there was a quiet tension. Nancy noticed he was spending more and more time alone, especially in the upstairs bathroom. That was his space, his retreat. No one went in unless absolutely necessary. His sleep cycle, already flipped upside down, became even more unpredictable. Nancy remembered fixing full meals at 2 a.m., only to have him ask for toast at 5 a.m. There was no pattern, just moments. Then came the day before everything changed. Elvis had been playing racquetball, sweating, laughing, talking with friends. Nothing seemed alarming. He came into the kitchen, tired but clear-eyed. Nancy offered him food. He smiled and declined. "I just want to sleep," he told her, "but I'll take some water." She handed the task off to Pauline, another staff member, who filled up a plastic jug. Not fancy glassware, just the kind you'd pour orange juice from. And Elvis grabbed it like he hadn't had a drink in days. Pauline later said she'd never seen him drink like that before. Nancy didn't think much of it at the time. "He's probably just hot from the game," she said. "He'll be fine after some rest." That would be her last direct moment with him. What seemed so normal, the water, the quiet steps upstairs, would soon become unforgettable. Not because of what happened next, but because it was the final moment he seemed okay. And sometimes, those are the ones that haunt us most. For decades, Nancy said almost nothing beyond warm recollections, while others cashed in on their connections. Former friends, distant relatives, old employees. Nancy kept her stories close. She had more stories than most, but she treated them like fragile keepsakes. She did write books later in life, Inside Graceland, The Maid, The Man, and The Fans. But even in those, she held back. Her words were measured. Her stories were affectionate. You wouldn't find sensationalism or scandal, just glimpses, small windows into a very private life. She wanted Elvis remembered for his humor, his kindness, his warmth, not for the chaos people love to gossip about. But privately, she carried questions, thoughts that lingered, patterns she noticed, words Elvis had said in passing that stayed with her. And as she got older, and the people who had been there started to pass on, Nancy began to feel a quiet responsibility. She never wanted fame, but she began to understand that if she didn't speak up, no one else would. So, in her final months, Nancy began opening up to close friends, sometimes in conversations, once, allegedly, in a quiet, recorded chat. "I don't think he passed the way they said he did," she said softly. She wasn't proposing conspiracies. She wasn't claiming something wild, but she was pointing to something deeper, that maybe the official version of events missed the truth. Nancy spoke of how Elvis wasn't reckless. He wasn't giving up. In fact, he had recently been talking about starting fresh, getting away from Graceland, escaping the pressure, not to disappear, but to find peace. She described the stash of books he kept upstairs, titles on spirituality, health, self-discovery. He wasn't drowning, he was searching, not in a loud, dramatic way, in a quiet, hopeful one. Nancy said he was tired, yes, but he hadn't let go. She believed that mattered. And when she was asked what she wished she had said publicly earlier, her answer was simple but chilling. He wasn't ready to go. Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. Nancy never tried to rewrite history. But in those final moments, she gave it a softer outline, a more human truth. There wasn't a stage, no microphone, no crowd hanging on every word, just a quiet room, a handful of people, and Nancy. Age had softened her voice, but her memory was sharper than ever. And when she spoke, it wasn't with drama, it was with calm, reflective certainty. "Elvis didn't leave the way people think he did," she began. She explained how that morning stood out, not because of any chaos, but because of its simplicity. Elvis had just asked for water, not food, not anything special, just water. But the way he drank it, quickly, like he hadn't had anything in days, that stuck with her. Then she shared something she'd never told anyone before. A few days earlier, Elvis had asked her, "Do you think people can start over?" Nancy answered yes, sure, if they want to. And Elvis looked at her and said, "Maybe I will. Maybe one day I'll just wake up and leave all this, disappear, just be a man again." He half smiled, like he was joking. But something in his eyes told her he wasn't. Nancy didn't believe he was planning to run away. But she did believe he was imagining something more peaceful, something outside of the spotlight. To her, he wasn't broken. He was just exhausted, not just physically, but spiritually. "They say he collapsed," she said. "But I think he was just done being Elvis for a while. He wanted to rest." Her words weren't meant to stir controversy. They were meant to offer understanding. And that's what made them matter. Even after Elvis was gone, Nancy didn't leave Graceland. She continued working the night shift, long after the tours ended and the last fans had gone home. When the house was quiet and only the echoes of memories remained, Nancy stayed. And that's when the unusual things began to happen. Lights flickering without reason, strange feelings in the trophy room. Things moved when no one was around. At first, she brushed it off, but over time, it became too frequent to ignore. She told it like it was no big deal. I'd be down in the trophy room, cleaning at night, and the lights would flash on and off, she said. I'd tell Mr. Elvis, "Now you leave these lights alone, I've got work to do." She wasn't frightened. In fact, she seemed amused by it, like it was just Elvis still keeping tabs on his house, still wanting things done a certain way. Others on staff had similar stories, but Nancy stood out. Not because of what she said, but how she said it, with the same calm, matter-of-fact tone she used when describing what sandwich Elvis liked best. She also remembered one night trying to nap in the middle of the trophy room. She lay down on the platform where Elvis's suits were displayed. "I was just trying to rest a little," she said, and someone shook my foot. She jumped up, startled. No one was there. "I know it was him," she laughed. "He was telling me to get back to work." To Nancy, it wasn't supernatural. It was familiar. A man who loved his home, maybe still checking in on the people he trusted most. She wasn't claiming he never left. She was simply saying, it didn't always feel like he was gone. And in a house as full of memories as Graceland, maybe that's not so surprising. When Nancy's quiet confession began circulating among Elvis fans, it didn't blow up on social media. There were no headlines, no breaking news. Instead, it started as a ripple, a quiet whisper on forums, at fan club meetings, in small corners of the Presley community. But for those who paid attention, it hit hard. Some fans were deeply moved. One longtime follower wrote in a group thread, "Nancy's words changed everything for me. I used to think he gave up. Now I think he just got tired of being everything for everyone." There was a shift. Suddenly, people weren't talking about what happened. They were wondering what could have happened. What if Elvis had gotten that quiet life he mentioned? What if he had made it out? Not everyone believed her. Some were skeptical. They asked, why now? Why didn't she say this years ago? But even the doubters had to admit, Nancy had nothing to gain. She wasn't selling a tell-all. She never wanted the spotlight, and she passed not long after those words were shared. Among Elvis scholars and biographers, her confession sparked a more thoughtful kind of conversation. The long-standing narrative had always been that Elvis simply fell apart under the weight of fame, but Nancy's version suggested something else. A man who still had hope, even in his most exhausted moments. A few smaller publications ran pieces titled things like "The Housekeeper Who Knew the King Best" and "Was Elvis Planning a Quiet Comeback?" Mainstream media largely ignored it. But within the world of true fans, the ones who had followed every moment, memorized every lyric, it was a game changer. Because this wasn't a rumor, it came from someone who had lived it. Even with everything Nancy finally said, a lot remains unanswered. She never gave a full account. She didn't drop a bombshell. Instead, she left us with pieces, just enough to make us wonder. What if Elvis really had a plan? What if he was taking steps toward a new beginning? There were signs, the books upstairs, the quiet talks, the comments about escaping the noise. Was he simply too worn out to take the next step? Or did someone stop him? Nancy never pointed fingers. She never made accusations. But she made it clear, something didn't sit right. She once said, "He was surrounded by so many people, so many needs, and I think he just wanted to be still for a moment." That statement hits differently when you picture Elvis not as a superstar, but as a man trying to breathe. There's also the question of timing. If Elvis was truly thinking about change, was it too late? Had the years of being on the road, carrying other people's expectations, already taken their toll? Nancy didn't pretend to have all the answers, but she gave us a crucial new angle. It's not about rewriting what happened, it's about reconsidering how we remember it. Because maybe the real story isn't about how Elvis's journey ended, but how close he came to beginning a new one. What Nancy offered wasn't controversy, it was clarity. Her words didn't try to tear down Elvis's image or dramatize his story. Instead, they added depth. She reminded us that behind the gold records and stage lights was a man, one who laughed in the kitchen, who asked for a peach cobbler, who sang hymns when no one was watching. Elvis wasn't someone who just faded away. According to Nancy, he was someone who had been trying, fighting even, for a different life. Not louder, not bigger, just quieter. And in that small act of sharing her truth, Nancy helped shift the lens. From tragedy to understanding. She didn't change the facts, but she changed the tone. And maybe that's what he needed all along, not to be idolized, but to be understood. So what if Elvis had followed through? What if he had walked away from the spotlight and started over somewhere far from Graceland? Would the world have accepted a version of him that didn't come with rhinestones or fanfare? Or was the crown always going to be too heavy to take off? Nancy's voice didn't give us a perfect answer, But it gave us something we rarely get when talking about legends: perspective. From someone who lived in the same house, saw the quiet moments, and never once tried to profit from them. And now we get to ask ourselves the bigger question: not just what happened, but what could have been. Do you think Elvis was truly planning a new beginning, or was he just dreaming of one? Let us know what you believe in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more real stories from behind the scenes, told by the people who were actually there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an episode. There's more to Elvis's story than what's been printed, and sometimes the quietest voices leave the biggest echo.